At the time, I signed a letter amongst many of the others on the NEC to try and overturn that decision, which was ignored.
But we were talking to quite a few members of Parliament, and just kind of like, where are we going with this? And the feeling amongst the PLP was not the same as the feeling amongst the PLP after the May elections.
But we had seen over a number of years of how selections are being carried out in the party, which is that the power and decision making again is concentrated behind closed doors in the hands of very few people, and that's not how the Labour Party should run.
Slates undermine party democracy. They run like a racket, to be honest, from my experience. In the run-up to 2024, the general election, you know, I won't mention any names or any slates for that matter or factions, but I spoke to numerous people who got in as MPs, and they said, oh, you know, through my selection process, XYZ slate said, if you support this, if you support that, if you support this person as leader when the time comes, we won't interfere with your selection process. It's a disgrace, really.
Hello and welcome to the latest LabourList podcast. My name's Emma Burnell. I'm the editor of LabourList, and I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by 4 candidates for Labour's NEC. The NEC is the governing body of the Labour Party. It's made up of different parts. We're going to get into that with these people. But first of all, I just want to thank Archilleos from Restoration Labour, Jane Thomas from Labour to Win, Jess Barnard from the Centre-Left Grassroots Alliance, and Kat Arnold from Mainstream Labour. Thank you so much, the 4 of you, for joining us. You are the 4 sort of official slates that are running. I know there are a number of independents too. But I just wanted to open with a very simple question. And perhaps all of you could give us a sort of very simple explanation. What is the NEC? What does it do? And why does it matter? Let's just go from you, Kat.
Okay, thank you. So the National Executive Committee is the strategic force and policy-making space for the Labour Party. It's made up of 39 members, and we have 8 committees that make decisions that then get recommended into the National Executive. And it handles things from financial governance to setting a good budget to looking at sponsorship for conference, but also doing things like handling complaints and disciplinary matters as well.
We'll get on to the more sort of possibly controversial parts. But I mean, Jess, in terms of a description, would you add to that at all, or do you think that's roughly?
Kat's done a pretty comprehensive job there. I guess one of the things for members to think about as well, because obviously when you join the Labour Party, most of the time your experience is with your local community, it's with your CLP, and that will be your experience in getting involved with the Labour Party. But the NEC is kind of there to kind of support with issues, listen to feedback from members, and I think that that's something that we want to get into today, and kind of what the role is in terms of supporting members directly and kind of driving forward the policies that members want to see alongside all of the kind of governance structures as well.
Jane, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned about policy making, because of course, really the policy making bit has kind of since the late 90s become more with National Policy Forum. So although we tend to say on lots of our statements about policy, I think you have to remember that we are the custodians of the rule book, and there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. And I'm particularly aware of kind of like the financial responsibilities, the legal responsibilities, the fact of sort of spending our members' money wisely and making sure that we have good governance and do what we say on the tin, really.
And finally, Andrew.
I think it's all pretty much been covered, but no, I just want to pick up on the point of I think the NEC has a role to ensure that both members, elected representatives, all of our officials adhere to the rule book within the Labour Party. And again, on that strategic direction, I think now more than ever, really, it's crucially important that sort of takes centre stage when members are deciding.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to add a note, 2 notes, in fact. First of all, as you've already seen, we are all members of the same party. And I think this is already proving that we can have a comradely discussion. And I will be the arbiter of that. Also, I'm a very active listener. So if you catch me nodding, I will be nodding at everybody vigorously because that's how I listen. So this is not a LabourList endorsement, which remains neutral in all internal conversations. But I do just want to be really clear that I'm not sat here with a stopwatch, but I will try to make sure that everyone gets an equal opportunity to come in. I'll come to different people first throughout the conversation. So I think there was an initial point, like most of all, there was like 90% point of agreement, and then maybe 10% of is it about policy or not. I think that maybe reflects the way that the Labour Party is perhaps set up. We do 90% of agreeing with each other for 10% of our time, and the other 90% of our time is spent on the 10% where we disagree. But I'm interested in unpacking that. So, Jess, you were the one who sort of mentioned that it has a role in policy making. Do you want to open that up a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a number of ways that plays out, right? And obviously, the one that most members will be interested in is how they can shape the policy direction of the party. And obviously, it's something that a lot of people in the party care about. And whether that is through passing motions at your local CLP, which then feed into the NEC, or whether that's kind of taking it all the way to the sovereign decision-making body of the party, those are the ways, members traditionally have kind of influenced policy alongside, the MPF as well. So I think the NEC is important in that because it kind of sets the framework for those discussions to happen. And over the past few years, we have seen a clamping down on that. We have seen a reduction in the opportunities for members to pass motions or debate issues that they care about, particularly in the moment of the cost of living crisis. We need to be listening to members and getting that feedback. And obviously, one of the things we saw under Keir Starmer's leadership was a bit of a disconnect, to be honest. And I think whether you supported him or not, I think it's fair to say there is a kind of driving wedge, I guess, between the membership and the sort of small group around the leadership during that period, which had a negative impact on members. And so the NEC needs to be thinking about how do we bring members back into the fold? How do we re-empower members to be making those policy decisions? And how can we get their buy-in again? Because we just know that if you kind of structure a party around a small number of people, we really lose the thing that makes the Labour Party so powerful and so special, which is the membership. That's the one thing we have, alongside our trade unions, of course, but the two things we have that set us apart from all of the other parties. And I think that it's important that we re-establish that connection again.
And Jane, you were quite focused on this sort of very governance aspects of the NEC. Do you see that as at all in conflict with what Jess was just saying?
No, not at all. But I just think, I do think it's a priority that there's a code, there's a kind of like, we know what we have to do on the NEC. We know what our responsibilities are. We are in a very privileged position that we get the opportunity to ask questions of, Secretaries of State and the Prime Minister, and we use that wisely and well, I hope. But I do think that it's interesting you mentioned the cost of living, because I actually think that became such a thing on the policy commission I sat on, the MPF, that also, we really encourage members to attend as much of those as possible and lobby very hard, especially on the 2-child cap. And I think that was quite effective. So sometimes I think it's our responsibility as well to make sure that we sort of direct people in the right places. This is what you use within the party to best express your opinions. And, don't let's forget sort of our responsibility as well on the NEC to staff. So, I'm hugely aware of that responsibility and making sure that we are the best employees and looking after our regional staff as well. So my interface and interaction is as much probably with the staff in Yorkshire as it is with the NEC, and I quite like that balance, because for members, they see their regional organiser far more than they see people on the NEC.
So moving on, you are all running on different slates. If this were simply a question of the governance issues rather than policy issues, it strikes me that there aren't sort of 4 different ways to read a budget, for example. So, Andrew, you're from the newest kid on the block in terms of the slates. Restoration Labour, I think this is the first time you've run candidates. So Why is that important to you? Why are you not running as independent? Why have you not joined one of these people and tried to change their mind? What is it that you feel that you have set up Restoration Labour to do?
I'll be honest with you, I was late to the slate.
It's all right, I was late to the podcast.
in my opinion, and this might be controversial, it probably will be within the Labour Party, but I actually feel that slates undermine party democracy. They run like a racket, to be honest, from my experience. In the run-up to 2024, the general election, you know, I won't mention any names or any slates for that matter or factions, but I spoke to numerous people who got in as MPs and they said, oh, you know, through my selection process, XYZ slate said, if you support this, if you support that, if you support this person as leader when the time comes, we won't interfere with your selection process. It's a disgrace, really. And that was going on, whether people want to talk about it or not. And, you know, I think now that we're in government, it's important to pick up on Jess's points that we're not just speaking to members. We're not just taking on board the aspirations, the views, the policies that are going to, you know, trend well with our membership. But actually, we need to be looking at the aspirations of the nation. And as CLP representatives, we're not just representing those members in those CLPs, we're also, to a degree, representing those communities across the country. And I think it's vital that we get out there and talk to those people. And in terms of our slate, the basis of it really is there's people from the left, there's people from the right, there's people from the centre ground. Put me where you will. But ultimately, the main goal of our slate is that we want to see, we're all either working class or have a determination to see greater working class representation within our party.
So I think that's a kind of a non-slate slate, I think, is the way that Restoration tends to kind of... But I think that the other three of you would probably say that you have a sort of space within the party. So if I could just come back down the line, Jane, starting with you.
I think it's interesting. I think the slate word has become something that is almost seen as a bad term. But look, you know, there are different traditions in the party. There always have been. And so this is nothing new. And actually... I actually think that in some ways, as long as we are respectful to each other and embrace those different traditions, I think they're actually quite a positive force, because we are only electable if we are a broad church. And I just think that, you know, funnily enough, I think you'll find there's a lot more that unites us and divides us on a lot of this stuff. But we will have different approaches. But I do think that respecting different traditions within the party is important, and also it's actually a good bellwether. So if you look at where people are voting for or where people are supporting, it will show what the sort of the ebb and flow of where things are falling within the party membership.
So I get a lot of press releases from mainstream Labour. And one of the phrases that I think I've read most often is, you know, standing against hyper-factional politics. I think that's something that mainstream, a phrase they've used a lot.
Yes.
So how does that tally with then running a slate, which is kind of, isn't that the emblem of factionalism?
That's really interesting. I knew you were going to ask me that question today. How does the dichotomy of that work? Well, I think the word, the hyper, is quite interesting to talk about, because I know that from mainstream's point of view, it's about the extremes of factionalism, which we've seen. And I would be honest, you know, I came into the Labour Party because I joined under Jeremy Corbyn. I was inspired by that new level of politics, and it spoke to me. But that, interestingly, when I came into the Labour Party and then could see the merits of Keir Starmer and what he was trying to achieve, and I can get behind that, and I can get behind any leader. But I have been on both sides of the coin, where we've seen hyper-factionalism, where we've seen some bad behaviour that has gone against the rules on the right side of the party and on the left side of the party. So I think it's that hyper-factionalism where you've got two groups that are effectively sort of vying against each other. That's the space we're talking about with that phrase. Factionalism for me is a platform to get you into the spaces where you can enable a broad church. are an important platform to lift people through that may not have actually been considered or have funding or having campaign resources put behind them. So I think it's a very important platform to have factions. But once you are in the spaces that you've been trying to achieve to break through, then it's about collegiate working and pluralism. And I would say that, you know, Jane and I and Jess and I, we all work together in that space. And so once you're in those spaces, it's about working cooperatively and with respect.
And Jess, obviously the left have often felt quite sidelined in, well, mostly my lifetime, let's face it, never mind yours. So has that, do you think, led to more organisation for things like internal elections and factions?
Well, I think that it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, really, isn't it? And what I will say is I don't actually see an issue with factions existing, right? It's a natural part of being in politics that you're going to organise with people that you have most in common with. As a socialist, like I organise with socialists, and I'm not going to, you know, apologise for that, but I kind of, you know, to tap into what Kat was saying, it is about making sure that we're disagreeing on those sort of policy or political issues, rather than working with our faction to concentrate power unfairly away from one faction or the other. You know what I mean? Working together towards sort of positive goals for the party. So I guess, you know, just through my experience of being on the NEC, I haven't been on it like for that long, but for the past 4 years, I haven't seen it working that way, and it's been quite a lot of sort of bad faith attacks, and I hope that this period marks a moment where we move forward and we recognise that actually that's not beneficial for the Labour Party, but it's also not beneficial for the people that we need to elect us and the communities that we represent. And so obviously those factions will continue to disagree, and that's okay, but it's like whether or not we can move forwards and deliver and focus on what the end goal is, which is, you know, transformative politics that people can feel in their daily lives.
So talk me through the NEC. Now, most of the time when an NEC decision happens, very few people sit around and go, oh my God, can you believe what the NEC have just done? So I'm before we go into the quite obvious question about can you believe what the NEC have just done, I think we'll come to. I'm interested in some of the decision making that those three of you who have been on the NEC, and Andrew, what you're hoping to take part in. Jane, can I start with you? What are when you're in an NEC meeting, what are the decisions that you think you're making that are actually impacting what it feels like on the ground to be a Labour Party member?
Some of this is just the nuts and bolts stuff. So it will be about funding, it'll be about priorities, it'll be about campaign priorities, it'll be about where we put money into and where resources go, what the staffing structure is like. I mean, these are all important things, and actually they're really important things to members. So some of those decisions are really important. I mean, there are a lot of subcommittees to the NEC as well, and actually, if you think about those, it's some of the subcommittees where I think you'll find that there are some of the things that you might be sort of trying to dig into a bit more. Coming back to your point, I do think generally it's collegiate. I do think that we are going to have disagreements, but I actually think I don't want everybody to be like me. Seriously, I like the tensions. I like the intellectual challenge. And I think that's what we should encourage. We have had some difficult decisions to make, and I'm going to touch on one that I know Kat and I felt very, very difficult about, was the Supreme Court ruling about women-only spaces. And I thought going through that process is really interesting because I think we were all very aware of the legal implications of that, and we had independent legal advice. And I think it showed, actually, it exposed just what it is like to take some really difficult decisions that impact on the organisation.
Jess, you sort of served, I think, slightly less long than Jane. But would you say that, you know, in terms of the way that decision making has come to, because we've all read books where the NEC in the 1980s was basically at each other's throats, And sometimes we read tweets now, because we don't read books anymore, we just read tweets, where it feels the same. Would you echo largely what Jane said? It's about kind of just finding the right way through, or does it become quite divided on some things?
I think historically, obviously, most of the time that I've been on the NEC, it has been under Keir Starmer's leadership. And I think in that period of time, there was a bit of a culture of very last minute kind of things coming to the NEC. And I, to be honest, did not feel that I was equipped as an NEC CLP rep with the information I needed to properly interrogate some of these decisions, which I think is something we really need to look at moving forward. So I take on board what you say, but I do think we need to look at what the role of the NEC is. And if we do genuinely believe that it should have a central role in the governance of the party, we need to have this information. One example I have of that is there was a decision taken to stop telling the NEC what the membership numbers of the party were, which I know, obviously was quite controversial. And at the time we were told, the decision had been taken, I didn't know by who, but not to make that information public anymore. Now, I felt that was something that should have been up to the NEC to decide. Like, if the NEC can't know the membership of its own party, then who can?
And trust me, LabourList is going to find out either way.
This is it. But also, we should be interrogating that, because if we are losing members, we're losing money, and then we are failing to deliver for the party and for our community. So we need to be able to interrogate these decisions and have the information. So I think
that has implications, doesn't it, on the kind of nuts and bolts decision that Jane was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would absolutely agree with everything you've just said, Jess, because a lot of us are on the Governance and Scrutiny Committee, and we know the implications of losing members, losing councillors, and what the loss of those allowances will mean to our bottom line. Yet there's this disconnect often with making some quite crucial decisions around things like audit and risk, and can we sign that risk off without having the whole picture. One of my big bugbears about being on the NEC is that if you were in a governance and scrutiny committee on your local council, which I have been and I've chaired, you would see a forecast, you would see a budget, you would see how you were doing against those things on a quarterly basis. But all of that is hidden in the business board. And that's a few chosen people who get lucky enough to be, if I'm being honest, in the right side of the party to be on that board. And so we are increasingly having to make decisions on very key items. And I've said this in my reports, the finances will come and we have to sign it off with an hour's notice. And that's really deeply worrying. Even if it was at parish council, that would be worrying, let alone the NEC. So there's some improvements there.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you now about the actual slates themselves. Andrew, I'm going to come back to you. I know you've already talked about your kind of principal things about class representation. But can you give us just a kind of, an elevator pitch as to what that would mean in terms of your role on the NEC were you to be elected?
Well, just quickly, just to kind of pick up on everything that's been said already about the role of the NEC and some of the decisions. It's my thinking really that to a degree the NEC should have a role similar to that of a scrutiny committee at a local authority level. I mean, I'm a chair of scrutiny, and we talking about disclosure of information to the NEC, you should have all of that information available to you. Otherwise, you can't make an informed decision on the strategic direction, on enforcing the rules, on anything really, unless you've got all of the information available to you. So there should be more structure to actually making sure that information is provided in a timely manner so that decisions can be taken. And equally, talking about different slates within the NEC, what I said before about restoration is we've got people from all traditions under the restoration banner, and we're quite happy to work with anybody really, as long as we're moving forward in a direction that benefits both the party and people across the nation. So I mean, our pitch as restoration really is obviously class representation, but it's been spoken about by Burnham, actually, funnily enough, the reindustrialisation of Britain. And, I don't mean opening up the mills again. I mean looking at reintroducing a skilled workforce again, which actually we need. If we're going to build, the next generation of social homes that we need the skills to do it. If we had the money to build all the homes we need tomorrow. We couldn't do it because we don't have the workforce to deliver it at pace. Similarly with retrofit, similarly with all of the infrastructure we need. So actually, it's incredibly important that we invest in those training opportunities and lift working class communities up, because that's, again, what we're about, is people in communities that we've lost to a degree are fed up of things being done to them. They feel disenfranchised. So it's about creating a narrative, creating a story, creating, you know, a party that they can feel part of, and a journey essentially that the nation can all go on together.
Great. And Jane, why are you running on the Labour to Win slate?
My tribe, I suppose, you know. Interesting. Look, Labour to Win, there needs to be a role for a sort of progressive, moderate arm within the party. It's how you win elections. We have always said, since sort of Keir Starmer's come in, we support the leader. We want to support Andy Burnham. We really, really want to focus on making sure that we have a second term. So sort of like building up the best campaigning machine, sort of supporting that. One of the things that I've been really keen to do is do a lot more outreach work in the other regions. So in the past, sometimes we've been a bit London and Southern focused. So the fact...
Doesn't feel like that at the moment.
The fact we've got two Northern girls, so myself and Angie, so Yorkshire and Lancashire, well represented. Obviously Yorkshire's far more important, but let's not go there. But yeah, so I've done a lot in the last 2 years to sort of really build up that base. But it's not just supporting Andy Burnham, it's supporting whoever the new General Secretary will be as well. But I mean, real focus
we'll
on that
probably
next
come
election.
to that, yeah. Jess, CLGA, why are you particularly passionate about being a candidate for that slate?
Well, I guess it covers a number of the things I've already talked about, but just to touch on kind of like why I'm personally kind of, you know, inclined politically in this direction. So I grew up in a town called Kings Lynn and saw the deindustrialisation of my town, but then also the impact of Tory austerity, and that's what drove me into the Labour Party essentially. And it was that determination to fight for a more equal society and more equal politics. And that's why I'm a socialist, and that's why I'm part of the CLGA slate. But alongside that, I think this is about, obviously the role of an NEC member is about what we've touched on, and that's, for me, the most important thing that we can do as CLP reps is empower those members, because if we have stronger membership, and you know, a membership which is broad, which is empowered and which is active, then we will have a successful Labour Party. And so I think every day that I go onto the NEC, my determination is to make sure we have the most democratic structures we can possibly have, and to represent those transformative politics that we need the Labour Party to deliver.
And finally, Kat, mainstream.
Yes, well, 3 things from the mainstream itself, and then 1 thing from the candidates who are on that mainstream slate. So for me, coming from a space where I never felt left enough being on the left side of the party or right enough to be under the Labour to Win slate, I feel like I've found my home. And that is a really democratic and open space in mainstream. So that is something I very much welcome. Something we would like to see across the whole of the Labour Party. But 3 things from mainstream itself is we're looking at those with, you know, the broadest shoulders to take on the largest tax burden. And that's something that's very morally important to me. We're also looking for sort of more public ownership across some of those utilities, and also to take that back, the democratic control of the Labour Party. You know, by the strength of our endeavours, it's written on our Labour Party card. And yet something that I feel very strongly about is that we had power very much concentrated in too few hands under the Starmer and under the Labour to Win modus operandi, and I want to see that change and open up, and for members' voices to be heard clearly. And a huge thing for me personally is that devolution of power back down to our CLPs. The CLPs are crying out to have control back on selections, on deciding which motions go to conference. So that's really important, very important to the mainstream banner.
Okay, so I'm going to go back down the line now. And I literally want 1-sentence answers. If you could change 1 thing about the way the Labour Party is run, so not 1 policy that the Labour Party may or may not adopt, but 1 way that it is run, what would it be? 1-sentence answer, Kat.
Democratic decision making within the membership.
Jess.
strengthen policy making for membership of the Labour Party.
Jane?
One specific thing, change the way CLP meetings are run. I've seen so much change. I've been in the party for 40 years. We still have the same structures for CLP meetings, and they are a turn-off for a lot of people. We really, if we can modernise our campaign techniques, we can modernise how we operate as a party.
And Andrew?
The comms have significantly improved with the new leadership, but I still think there's a way to go to build a narrative that brings people with us.
Okay, so speaking of the new leadership, that brings me neatly to one of the biggest things that has been discussed about the NEC in 2026. There has obviously been two decisions by the NEC officers group, and I will ask one of you to sort of explain the difference between that and the full NEC as well. First of all, in February, a certain Mr. Andrew Murray Burnham, I'm checking with James there because he knows the full name, was told that he would not be allowed to run in Gorton and Denton as our candidate there. And a set of reasons, ostensibly sensible reasons, were given. And a few months later, a certain Mr. Andrew Murray Burnham was told that he would absolutely be the right candidate, and I believe the only candidate for the election in Makerfield. So, given that the NEC is a body there to implement the rule book, and the rule book didn't change, what happened? Who wants to jump in with the incredibly controversial answer first?
I might go first if that's Okay, so the decision, as you know, to decide whether Andy Burnham could run for Gorton and Denton was decided amongst the officers, and I think there was I think everybody voted for, bar one person. I'm going to try and remember who that person is.
Lucy Powell.
It was Lucy Powell. Thank you very much. If I'm going to be blunt, I think it was a big mistake for Keir Starmer to have voted in that. I mean, the majority in the room would have carried, so I don't really understand that. I think that was a big mistake on his part, of which it came back to burn him. But at that time, we were NEC members were finding out through the press when the officers were meeting what they were leaning to do. And I think that was deeply inappropriate, and I thought that was really abhorrent, actually, and it made me incredibly cross, as I know it did other NEC members. So we were having, as NEC members, to answer some of the journalist calls that we were getting, and we hadn't even been communicated with. And that goes back to the communication piece. And actually, there's a huge amount of communication and timeliness of communication. And as you know, Emma, at the time, I signed a letter amongst many of the others on the NEC to try and overturn that decision, which was ignored. And then, thankfully, the second occasion ended up working well and positively, in that we had, the best potential players on the pitch for our members. There'll be more to say, but I don't.
Jane.
Listen, we weren't in the room. It was 8-1. You're quite right. I think the circumstances were quite interesting. There were a couple of things for me, like the 35-day rule that a lot of people had failed to recognise. So if Burnham had won Gorton and Denton, the 35 rule would have meant that you would have had to have the Manchester mayoral by-election slap bang in the middle of April, short campaign, and we would have had to have diverted resources. We could have done that, but somebody somewhere would have lost on the locals. I think the other thing is the 5 billion bung for reform hadn't started to bite then. Would we have won Manchester? I don't know. This is all speculative. The interesting thing, the weekend of that, and I do take your point, Kat, about finding out in the newspapers what on earth was going on. I think the interesting thing was it was the North West Labour Regional Conference that weekend. And I happened to be at that because we got a
It was
stall.
also the Fabian conference because James and I were there.
Yeah, but what was really interesting was quite a few, I don't know how many MPs were at yours, but we were talking to quite a few members of Parliament, and just kind of like, where are we going with this? And the feeling amongst the PLP was not the same as the feeling amongst the PLP after the May elections. And the only thing that I think, and again, we're all speculating here, the only thing I think is, because the PLP weren't so resolute about their decisions then, I think you'd have had a leadership challenge. So come April, you'd have had the Manchester mayoral election and you'd have had a leadership challenge. And that would have, I think that would have been quite difficult. The shock and awe about the way it was done, really. I mean, it was swift. The second time round, it was done very cleanly.
Jess, and then I'll come to you, Andrew, although I know that you basically have as much input into this as I did.
So I think one of the things to remember is that this isn't this was a sort of special circumstance.
Yeah.
However, this did reflect a pattern that we had seen over a number of years of how selections are being carried out in the party, which is that the power in decision making, again, is concentrated behind closed doors in the hands of very few people. And that's not how the Labour Party should run. Whether we think that it was beneficial long term or short term, to me, isn't the priority. It was about was the rule being followed. I don't think it was a fair approach to the selection, and it caused us to lose a huge amount of members, and it caused a large number of councillors to lose their seats. I do believe there is a direct correlation between the decision to block Andy Burnham and the results of the May local election. So I really do think that there needs to be some reflection on the best interest of the party, and it felt that there was a sort of factional alignment to protecting Starmer over what was best for the party in that moment. So I think it was incredibly irresponsible and wrong, and that should never be allowed to happen again.
I'm quite interested. I think one of the moments of tension, I think, that I'm picking up between... So Jane, you said, somebody would lose, but obviously in May, many people did lose.
Oh, I know. But, I mean, we were speculating, aren't we?
Yeah.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and we don't know. I think, and this sounds awful in some ways, to harden up the PLP, they had to see those May election results, because the PLP were not in that space in February.
Could I come back?
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying, but I think our job as CLP reps is to make sure that it isn't just up to the PLP, right? So our job is to recenter power into the hands of members. So on the NEC, we need to be challenging that and saying, who is it that runs the party? Is it all of us collectively, or is it just the group of people?
Yeah, but the PLP stuff becomes important because, of course, of the leadership, because of the process of the leadership stuff.
Yes, because we knew that Andy wasn't just running for Makefield. So I think that's a fair challenge, but I think it also opens up my next topic.
I wanted to come back.
Oh, please, Kat, go ahead.
Well, because I was dying to say this as well.
Sorry, Andrew.
I think it's about choice, a lot of this. So you cannot embolden and ask for the power of our members to go out and knock on doors to support the MP, to get them elected, and then take any decision making around potential new leaders, candidates, who you want to represent you, out of those members' hands. You do not get to have it both ways. And my concern with you took us heavily loading our responses based on the PLP is actually, behind every MP, you've got 5 members of staff potentially working in the office, but you've got sort of hundreds of a membership movement behind that. So you have to respect that, and you cannot cherry pick as and when you use members' goodwill and energy.
And sorry, Andrew, I'm going to bring you in.
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, I can sort of see it from both sides. One side, the constitution.
Very Restoration Labour of you.
Well, from a constitutional perspective, I don't profess to know the rule book inside and out at this point. I know
that's your first job if elected.
Exactly,
you know that, right?
yeah. But it seemed by the explanation we were giving to be a fair, application of the rules to block Burnham. But the NEC as the ruling body to decide the strategic direction of the party. Sure, just read the room. Surely you can see the direction of travel of the nation, of the party, of its membership. Your job is there, you're there, especially CLP representatives, to represent those views, those opinions. And he should have been allowed to stand. But again, I really hate hypotheticals, but there was no guarantee that he was going to win Gorton and Denton, and Makerfield felt a lot more positive following the catastrophic outcome of the local elections. I mean, thankfully, I held my seat, but a lot of my friends didn't.
I do think it's the one thing that I'm aware of, and that is unfortunate, is that members never had a say in. And I just, however we did this, and like, it was Wendy that introduced this rule just as I came on the NEC about, giving up, about MPs giving up their seats to go for mayorals, or mayorals giving up the seat, whatever. And I do agree that you should see your term out. So I do think that's a great rule. Somehow we need to make sure, this is so unique set of circumstances, but you are right, we should never repeat that. And members, whatever the circumstances, members do need to have some.
It shouldn't take catastrophe before we agree that we need to change, and it happens every time.
So I'm going to come back to you again, Andrew, because I feel like I've given you the least time so far, but I think I'd like to hear from all of you, because I think this might be one of the key differences between the various slates. There's been a sense, you particularly are running to be CLP representatives, right? So you're there to represent ordinary members like myself. But I think there is always a tension, and we talked about the PLP and their role in a leadership contest. They obviously have the nominations threshold, so if you only get one nomination, sorry, Catherine West, then you're not going to get through. But one of the things that I've read about for years in all of the books that I've read, and I'm a very dull person, so I've obviously read loads, is this: some people believe that the job of the NEC is to be kind of decision makers and to look at the evidence that they're presented with, that they see that nobody else does. Whether they see it or not, that's a separate question. But let's assume we actually get the evidence, and use their judgment that they have on an issue by issue basis. Other people would say that the job is to be as a delegated representative of members. Members should vote on every decision. It should all be as democratic, turtles all the way down. Andrew, do Restoration have a sort of position on how you would take decisions were you to be elected onto the NEC?
Not particularly, but I think it's a bit of both of what you've said. I think there is an element where, one of the things that I'd love to do if I did manage to get onto the NEC would be sort of like my own listening tour of, within 2 years, speak to somebody or some people from every CLP in the country. I'd love to do that, and I think that's really important so that we get an understanding, because no two constituencies are the same. The issues aren't the same everywhere, which is why it's so hard to make universal policy across the nation. But the other element is the NEC does need to take decisions, and that's why I think it's really important that we have a reflective NEC that have the skills and the experience of our movement at that table, really. I was a campaign organiser for over a decade.
Now, we are running low on time, so I'm going to ask you to give me really snappy answers. And I think so Jane, where do you stand on the delegated versus wisdom of your own sort of experience decision?
Obviously my wisdom. No, I think... Thank God for WhatsApp, really, because I've got so many different groups on WhatsApp that I do, and I do send out stuff regularly to people, and I do ask for comments. You're right, we don't always get an agenda that sort of much in advance. So I can't go, oh, this is coming up. But I have been able to feed back a lot of stuff, and I've had some brilliant campaigning ideas that I can feed into the NEC. So it is a mixture of both. I think getting round to CLPs is really important. And I think just being accessible so people know that I'm on the NEC. And as far as people on the Labour to Win slate, we are fairly, we come from very different backgrounds. So we try and cover it off that way as well.
Jess?
Yeah, I guess there's a balance to be struck, right? Obviously, we couldn't consult members directly on every single decision, but we should endeavour to do that wherever we can. Obviously, since I've been on the NEC, I've been writing report backs to members and trying to increase that accessibility, because the more we hear from members, the more we can kind of tap into what's going on and not be in the situations we've been in over the past few months, with kind of being disconnected from the membership and seeing them abandon Labour. So I think it's that balance. But what I would say is we have seen a lot more concentration of delegated decisions within the NEC itself. So you have, one or two people often making decisions that will happen on the NEC. So I think we do collectively need to advocate for more broad decision making on the NEC, so that our kind of broad membership is represented across that. But yeah, I do think both we need to increase our accessibility as NEC members, but also empower them to make decisions at a local level, particularly on selections.
Okay, so never have I felt more pressure having a pithy answer to the
Wait till you get to the next round.
to the delegation of duties. So I'm going to take a slightly different tack from the others and say that, what the NEC is not, and sometimes people expect it to be, is an independent arbitrator of one person's particular issue. That's for the Complaints and Disciplinary Committee. And although if we do see unjust practices, we will pick those up, and I pick those up. And so there's that one thing to cover off. I think the second thing is, for me, I'd like to see more separation of decision making. So if I give you an example of that at the NEC, for something like the deputy leadership contest, we had the timetable, the process, the code of conduct, and decision making all taken as one vote. And actually there were issues with a couple of the papers that I just could not raise. So things like that, I'd like to see more separation of decision making. And like others, lots of feedback, the use of WhatsApp. If things are coming up really quickly, I've got a big group, Sussex wide WhatsApp group, and I will say, big decision coming up, I'm going to poll you, what would you do in this response to this? And we get back a majority view. If you don't get back a majority view, okay, if I could do this for you and push that lever, would that make a difference? And that kind of conversation is happening increasingly. I'd like to have more access to bigger WhatsApp groups to be able to do that.
Really?
But those are yeah, I know, I've got something like 20 already. But so that's the sort of thing that we can do. But so those three changes I would like to see is that, expectation setting, separation of decisions, and wider access to WhatsApp groups to help me make those decisions.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one or two really quick fire questions now. I want literally 1-2 word answers from each of you. Should the NEC be more powerful or less powerful? Kat, more or less?
More powerful, but in collegiate decision making.
Jess?
Oh, that's a really difficult thing to answer. I mean, I guess less, but only in exchange for members having more power.
Jane?
I don't think it should have more power.
Okay. Andrew?
I don't think it should have more power either.
Okay. Should the NEC be elected every 2 years as it is now, or like an MP every 5 years? Kat?
Every 2 years, I think, is healthy, because actually we're seeing a very changing landscape politically.
Jess?
Every 2 years, and as much as it might be kind of tiring, it's a long campaign, right? It's about sort of 6 months for us. But despite that, it's important members regularly get to have a say and hold us to account. So 2 years.
I would agree. I mean, I think you could stretch to 3 years. What I don't think we need is a 3-week contest.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think 2 years. 2 years works. It's a fast-paced, changing environment, isn't it? Politics, so it makes sense.
Do you think internal elections, such as for the NEC, create more factionalism? Yes or no?
I think, no, I don't think so. I think perhaps timetabling of elections confuses people. And so if you've got lots of different elections at the same time, that can be confusing. Like if you're electing for the execs of regional boards, that could be confusing.
And Jane?
No.
Jess?
No, just simple no.
Andrew,
Yeah.
go on, mix it up.
I do think it creates more factionalism. The fact that we're all sitting here from different factions, making our pitch from different factions, it creates greater divides.
Do you think that factionalism would play out regardless, though, if we didn't allow members to have a say at a local level, that would develop?
I'm sure it would. You know, people naturally gravitate towards people that share their opinions and views. But I think by the way they work within the Labour Party can often be quite combative. And I think there needs to be if there was a better culture around the factions and how they interact, and if there was more collaboration, because we are a broad church and all supposed to be pulling in the same direction, I think it could work in a positive way. But as it is at the moment, I don't really see that.
So I'm going to be quite random now, because we are running out of time, and I am just generally quite random. I am going to ask Jess, say something nice, not just about Jane, but about Labour to win.
Oh my goodness. Well, I enjoy working with Jane. I think we can disagree and agree at different points on the NEC. I always enjoy your contributions on the NEC. I think they're always thoughtful. Labour to win. I mean, I guess I do believe that they've, put in a lot of effort into the supporting the kind of rolling out of campaigns. So the structure of when you're delivering a campaign at local level, like Labour really understands what is needed, and all of the kind of building blocks that make that successful. So I would, huge amount of respect for that.
Andrew, same question for Mainstream.
I'm actually a member of Mainstream.
Well, that's quite easy then.
No, but I'm quite pragmatic. So I'm a member of Mainstream, but I work closely with colleagues in Labour to win as well. What works, and I think that's what we should be looking at, really.
Well, that's quite cross-factionalism communication.
There you go. Jane, something about the CLGA.
Oh, I just think sort of in terms of the tradition that you bring. So ever since I've been active at National Policy Forum level, regional board, there's been Grassroots Alliance. And I genuinely do think intellectually I need to be challenged. And sometimes, to be quite honest, you'd be surprised how much I agree with a lot of the policy. The overriding thing about me personally is I'm just pragmatic. And, the pragmatism in me recognises that actually a broad church, the moderate arm of the party, needs some representation. But no, I mean, the same thing, I would say the same thing. A lot of the little things, not the little things, the probing in particular, needs to be there. And I think you are very good at, and your side of the party are very good at that.
And finally, Kat, what do you believe that Restoration have brought to the party in establishing themselves?
Right. Well, so I would like to thank Restoration for running a slate, because actually we need more working class representation across all candidates in the Labour Party. Particularly, I think, at every level of our councils and our mayorals. And, if we didn't have that concentration on encouraging more working class candidates into the fray, we wouldn't have the Barbara Castles of the world, we wouldn't have Angela Rayner's of the world. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you progress on that front.
So I want to thank all four of you for what has been a really useful, I think, for Labour members still making their minds up, still thinking, I don't even know what the NEC is and does and what it's for, why am I being asked to vote for it? I think this has hopefully been a really, really useful discussion, which is exactly what the role of LabourList is to ensure that Labour members are as well informed about their party as possible. So thank you all so much for that. And thank you all for watching. Obviously, if you've enjoyed this, please don't forget to subscribe on the button below. You can also follow us across social media and subscribe to our daily newsletter, where we will bring you all the news and views about the NEC. So it just leaves me to say thank you to Andrew, Jane, Jess and Kat for taking part in this discussion today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Right. So we've just finished our NEC, pre-election podcast, but it was more of a kind of broad discussion. Myself and Dan had the privilege of watching along, / I was trying to run the production through a series of quick, sharp messages to my boss about how to sort of just move things along and make sure everyone got an equal time. But Yeah, interesting conversation. Emma, sitting in and chairing it amidst my, many frantic messages about how much time everyone was getting. How was it actually being in there and sort of engaging in that conversation with them?
I mean, I am a geek about the Labour Party, right? So an hour-long discussion about the Labour's NEC, what's it for, how does it work, what should it do, is basically my happy place. It's like a Jackie Collins novel on a beach for me. So I found it really interesting. I found all of their approach to it really good, actually. They weren't simply spouting sort of pamphlet lines.
Mm-hmm.
They were genuinely engaging in a crunchy discussion on what the NEC is for. There were parts I agreed with, parts I disagreed with. They all think they should have elections every 2 years, which I think is mental. But that's me.
But so what do you what do you feel you took away from that the NEC was for? Then, if you were someone who, like you say, try and take away from the fact that as the editor of LabourList, you almost by job title have to be a geek on the Labour Party. But if you were someone who didn't really know too much about the NEC, perhaps you were a new member and you decided to watch this to find out a little bit more, what do you think you would take away from the conversation we saw from those 4 different slates about what the NEC is, does, and purposes?
So I think it's really interesting because I think the NEC kind of has a dual purpose. And there's the rule book and the accounts and the management of the organisation that is the Labour Party. And I think that's about 90% of the day-to-day work of the NEC is managing that.
The nuts and bolts.
The nuts and bolts, as Jane said, yeah. But I think that there are moments when those nuts and bolts actually become quite political. So where campaigning money goes, how selections are run, what happens in terms of the disciplinary process, how that's applied, is it applied evenly and fairly? All of these things have been huge parts of any political book you will have read that covers any of the last, at least 50 years. So, people will say it all got like that under Blair, or it all got like that under Corbyn, or it's all been like that under Starmer. Pick your starting point. But, if you can go back as far as I can, it all got like that under Kinnock. And I suspect my parents would say it all got like that under Callaghan or Wilson or whatever. So I think the NEC is whatever we think of in terms of it being that nuts and bolts management body. There is no part of Labour Party history where the NEC hasn't also been a politics body.
Mm. So, Dan, as someone who had the pleasure of watching all that unfold firsthand, what do you think the key takeaways were for you? What were the things that were revealed, I suppose, a little bit in terms of the way in which these slates think? These 4 different approaches to Labour Party politics, the 4 families, if you will. They're different thought processes as to how things should be applied, where they were similar, where they were different. What did you sort of take away from watching all that unfold?
Well, for me, the thing that struck me was there are quite a lot of similarities. I think they all come from the same sort of place of wanting the Labour Party to do well, and I think they all acknowledged that perhaps for the Gordon Denton decision was extremely difficult, and obviously some of that is with hindsight, and of course all 4.
Where we saw the most tension, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course all 4 of them weren't in the room when that decision was made, but that is where we did, as you said, see the flare-ups about exactly what the NEC should be in that sort of situation when they have to make those difficult decisions. I think it was quite telling that the CLGA and Mainstream were the ones that really were pushing about party democracy and members' say, and devolving greater powers from party bodies to CLPs and members more directly, whereas Labour to Win sort of took a slightly different approach, and Restoration were very focused on sort of the class element of the Labour Party, which has always been an important element of the party proper. But yeah, it's a really fascinating discussion. I think I came out of it learning more about the NEC than I did going in, which is to the credit of all 4 of them.
Yeah, I think this is something I'd like to put to you both, actually. Just see whether you think this is a fair takeaway from listening to all of them or not. But it did seem like across those four families, you actually did get quite a good breadth of what the Labour movement's ingredients are. You did get working class representation and it being baked into the working class movement. You got the moderate arm, you got the socialist arm, and then you got the kind of, I feel as the mainstream sort of sits as that sort of middle point between all of those things, that soft left sort of home for everyone who isn't necessarily putting one of those three things at the absolute forefront of their political identity within the Labour Party. So to see that sort of play out where all of them are sat next to each other talking about, in this instance, an internal body and an internal sort of election process, factionalism, etc. Do you feel as though we actually kind of got a bit of a glimpse into just the Labour Party in a much more sort of like microcosmed perspective of what is quite a large thing that we see across CLPs and councils and the PLP across all levels, those different sort of fundamental pillars of what makes up the Labour movement?
Apart from trade union representative, which would not be appropriate here because they're not running for the CLP slots, obviously.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good analysis, actually. Yeah. There is, I think what you got was four people who quite adequately represent, if you were to go along to a CLP meeting that's reasonably active, those are the four types of people you might meet there. I think that's probably like a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's good as well that this time when members do get a say, and they're voting at the moment now, is that they've got that breadth of choice that are on the ballot when they do cast their vote. And of course, there are independents that we should obviously mention as well who can all join us here. Otherwise, be walking outside the room. But I think it's to the credit of all the different sort of groups and factions that. There is that space for all of those different voices, and that members do have a genuine say this time around.
I would like to add just on the independents, because I do think it's important to say, look, we did some polling before we put together this podcast, and it was quite clear, like, that the slates are going to get the people elected. But I do think those, and we couldn't have had, I think there's something like, there are nearly 20 candidates, something like that. So we couldn't have had everybody in the room. We couldn't have any more than one from each slate in the room. But I do think that we should be clear that we're not taking a position on whether the slate should win. We just followed our polling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting to think about like you pointed to earlier, the fact that they all believe 2 years is the right length of time for the NEC. Could you put the case as to why that's maybe... Because no one on the podcast did put the case to them as to where that would maybe be not beneficial.
I probably disagree with you here. I think 2 years probably is a right amount. So, if you're only going to get more affirmation of
okay,
that.
I'm gonna make my case. Here's the thing, right? These elections take quite a lot of time and quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of campaigning focus from some of the people who are most engaged in our party. And they are talking not to the electorate, but to each other, to party members, about how to run the party. And I think that is a process that's important. I think it should take place. That it takes place every other year, rather than 1 year out of 4, we spend our summers talking to ourselves about ourselves. That, to me, is a party that's too focused inward and not enough focused outward.
That's a fair point. But if you look at the situation where we were in 2024 and compare that with now, like that would be in a sort of weird sort of stasis where you've got a sort of more soft left environment within the sort of government, and yet a sort of more...
Yeah, but it was this NEC that was forced to make the decision on Burnham. So,
that's true.
Yeah, the member feeling was heard somewhere.
Well, it's the case that they made, isn't it, Dan? That they said that the political landscape shifts and shifts quick, and so it's good for them to be able to shift with it. But I mean, if it was completely up to me, I would change a lot about how the NEC was run. Obviously, with 4 candidates that are here for a specific type of election that's going on at the moment, it's not really worth their while having me put that to them to go. But just as an idea for food for thought, I've often said to both of these guys in general sort of conversation,
Yes, you have.
that I'd like to see the NEC run more like jury duty within the Labour Party, that it should be a completely independent selection. It is done on a case-by-case basis. I appreciate there needs to be perhaps a specific body around those nuts and bolts that you talked about earlier, and I also appreciate the point that you made before around when dealing with those nuts and bolts and money often is involved and resource, immediately that becomes political, because it's about where does money and resource go, and that is a political decision within a political party. But in the case of something like the Gorton and Denton and Makerfield situations, and the NEC being shut out by the NEC officers body and the way that was discussed on here, I just think for a lot of membership discussions, the idea that there are slates and factions that put themselves forward and campaign for specific support around a specific type of Labour Party politics does create more internal conflict that perhaps, while it might not be realised on a panel of 4 people in a podcast, maybe later on down the line when conversations about money and resource are happening, you are looking towards your own slate for what you should do, more so than a broad spectrum of the membership, which is something clearly that Restoration Labour had an issue with, describing it as like a racket at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So, interesting conversation nonetheless, though. Thank you very much, Emma, for chairing it. And we hope you enjoyed it. You have got until when, Dan Green, for your vote to be cast in this election?
Oh, God, you put me on the spot there. I think it's a couple of weeks you've got left. I think it's sometime in September. But check the LabourList website for the exact dates.
Yeah. And we will continue to cover these elections. We'll be bringing you, I'm sure, all of our sort of individual thoughts over the next few days as well, as to, where the Labour NEC conversation leads to following this one. But for now, as Emma said earlier, please do hit the subscribe button. Also, as always, I have to say, we could not do something like this without our friends at LabourList, so thank you very much to our friends. I also want to thank the Labour Party specifically as well. We had to speak to them specifically to ensure that a conversation like this could happen, and they were very receptive to allowing something like this. So thank you very much to the party as well for working with us on this. Thank you to our 4 slate candidates for joining in the conversation, and thank you to you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.
Just before we stop recording, sorry, I've got a bit of news for you.
Oh, go on.
I'm engaged.
Can I tweet that? Is that if got
I told you. Oh, I should have known you were going away, and I was like,
I didn't actually plan on doing it then, but it was the sort of perfect moment, so I proposed to. What was that?
oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so happy for you.
I knew you'd have this reaction.
Look at the cameras.